Have you heard the saying, too much of everything is dangerous? This was the case of Solomon, the wisest king to ever rule God's own nation. Beneath the layer veneer of wisdom, glory, and riches lies a darker narrative of the same king. The tale of a man who, despite all he had and all God had given him, ultimately succumbed to the temptations of power and wealth. To understand Solomon's story and how dark he went at the later end of his life, we must first go back to his beginnings, to a time when his father, King David, ruled Israel. David, the warrior king, had expanded Israel's territory and established Jerusalem as its capital. He was a man after God's own heart, but he was also flawed. One of the most significant and controversial episodes of David's life was his affair with Bathsheba, a married woman. This affair led to the birth of Solomon, after the tragic loss of David and Bathsheba's first child, a son who died as a result of David's sin. Solomon was born into a royal household that was both blessed and burdened. His father, David, was a king who had achieved much, but had also made many enemies. As a child, Solomon would have witnessed the complexities of palace life, where political alliances were formed and broken, where his father's past sins still cast a shadow over the royal family. Despite these challenges, Solomon was loved by God from birth, as the prophet Nathan conveyed to David, giving him the name Jedediah, which means beloved of God. As Solomon grew, he was educated in the ways of the kingdom. He was tutored in the scriptures, the law, and the traditions of his people. He also would have learned about governance, military strategy, and diplomacy, skills essential for a future king. But Solomon's rise to power was not straightforward. As David grew old, a power struggle emerged within the royal family. Adonijah, Solomon's older half-brother, declared himself king even before David had died. This act of defiance set the stage for a dramatic turn of events. Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, along with the prophet Nathan, reminded David of his promise that Solomon would succeed him as king. In a bold and swift move, David had Solomon anointed as king, thwarting Adonijah's ambitions and securing the throne for Solomon. This moment was pivotal. Not only did it establish Solomon as the rightful heir, but it also demonstrated the hand of God in his ascension to the throne. However, Solomon's rise to power was not without bloodshed. To consolidate his rule, Solomon ordered the execution of Adonijah, Joab, David's former commander who had supported Adonijah, and Shimei, a man who had cursed David during Absalom's rebellion. These actions, though ruthless, were necessary to secure his kingdom and eliminate any threats to his reign. With these initial challenges behind him, Solomon's reign began, and Israel was poised to enter its golden age under his leadership. Solomon's reign is often celebrated as a time of unparalleled wisdom, wealth, and prosperity in Israel. His early years as king were marked by a divine encounter that would define his legacy. After ascending to the throne, Solomon felt the immense weight of responsibility placed upon him. He recognized that he was young and inexperienced, and that leading the people of Israel was no small task. In a moment of humility, Solomon turned to God for guidance. God appeared to Solomon in a dream at Gibeon and offered to grant him whatever he desired. Instead of asking for wealth, power, or long life, Solomon made a request that would set him apart. He asked for wisdom to govern his people justly. Pleased with Solomon's selfless request, God not only granted him unparalleled wisdom, but also promised him riches, honor, and a long life if he remained faithful to God's commandments. This divine gift of wisdom became evident early in Solomon's reign. One of the most famous stories illustrating his wisdom is the case of the two women who came to him with a dispute over a baby. each claiming to be the child's mother. Solomon's solution was cutting the baby in half and giving each woman a part, revealing the true mother, who was willing to give up her claim to save the child's life. This judgment not only resolved the dispute, but also established Solomon's reputation as a wise and discerning king. Under Solomon's rule, Israel flourished. His wisdom attracted leaders and dignitaries from all over the known world. One of the most famous visitors was the Queen of Sheba, who came to test Solomon's wisdom with difficult questions. She was so impressed by his answers, the wealth of his kingdom, and the splendor of his court that she praised Solomon and blessed the God of Israel. Solomon's wisdom was not limited to governance. He was also a prolific writer, credited with many of the Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon, texts that continue to offer profound insights into life, love, and the nature of God. One of Solomon's most significant achievements was the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. This was a project that his father, David, had longed to complete, but it was Solomon who saw it through. The temple became the center of worship for the Israelites and a symbol of God's presence among his people. Solomon spared no expense in building the temple, using the finest materials and skilled laborers. The dedication of the temple was a grand ceremony, marked by Solomon's prayer for God's continued favor on Israel and a sacrificial offering of 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep and goats. God responded by filling the temple with his glory, signifying his acceptance of Solomon's prayer and the people's worship. Solomon's reign was also marked by tremendous wealth and prosperity. He established extensive trade networks, formed alliances with neighboring nations, and undertook massive building projects, including the construction of his own palace and the fortification of key cities. Israel, under Solomon's leadership, became a powerful and influential nation, admired and respected by other kingdoms. The wealth of Solomon's kingdom was legendary, with gold and silver being as common as stones in Jerusalem. This is a large part of the story we know, all the positive and well-known parts that have been told. Now, on to the dark part. From here, there are two parts of Solomon's dark story I will be exposing: the canonized and the uncanonized. The dark and canonized story. Despite all the wisdom and success that marked Solomon's early reign, his later years were characterized by a series of decisions that led to his spiritual and moral decline. The same things that brought him glory also sowed the seeds of his decline. One significant area where Solomon strayed was in his marriages. To solidify his political alliances, Solomon married many foreign women, 700 wives, and 300 concubines in total, many of whom came from nations that God had explicitly forbidden the Israelites to intermarry with. These women brought with them their own gods and religious practices, and over time, they turned Solomon's heart away from the Lord. This was a direct violation of God's commandments, as the Israelites were instructed not to worship other gods or take foreign wives who might lead them into idolatry. As Solomon aged, he began to build high places and altars for the gods of his wives, including Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. This idolatry was a stark contrast to the devotion Solomon had shown earlier in his reign. The consequences of Solomon's idolatry were severe. God was displeased with Solomon's actions and warned him that his kingdom would be torn from him as a result of his disobedience. However, out of respect for David, Solomon's father, God promised that this division would not occur during Solomon's lifetime, but would happen during the reign of his son. This prophecy came to pass after Solomon's death, when his son Rehoboam's harsh policies led to the rebellion of the northern tribes, resulting in the split of Israel into two kingdoms, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Dark in uncanonized tales. Before you start being skeptical about what you're about to hear, I want you to understand that these stories are not in the Bible, and its credibility is doubtful and insignificant to believers, but it has been passed down through various traditions and add a layer of intrigue to the story of the wisest king. These stories, although not canonized, offer an interesting view of the wisest king. These stories contain scenes of demonology. Now you wonder if you truly know Solomon. Let's take a trip down the uncanonized lane of King Solomon. This is the testament of Solomon and the tale of Asmodeus. In the heart of Jerusalem, during a time when the city was abuzz with the construction of the Grand Temple, King Solomon sat in quiet contemplation. His kingdom was flourishing, and his people were at peace. But Solomon's mind was troubled. There were whispers of malevolent forces in the land, unseen, yet felt by all. Solomon, known far and wide for his wisdom, sensed the presence of dark forces that threatened to disrupt the peace of his reign. One day, a young boy came before Solomon, his eyes hollow, his strength drained. The boy spoke of an invisible tormentor who visited him every night, stealing his vitality. Disturbed by the boy's plight, Solomon prayed to God for guidance. In answer, the archangel Michael appeared, holding a ring inscribed with the powerful seal of Solomon. "Take this ring, O wise king," Michael said, "for with it you shall have dominion over all demons. No evil shall stand before you." With the ring in his hand, Solomon summoned the demon Orneus, who had been tormenting the boy. The air grew cold, and Orneus appeared, sneering at the king. But when Solomon held up the ring, the demon felt its power and was forced to kneel. "Why do you torment this child?" Solomon demanded. "Because I can," Orneus replied with malice. "I feed on his life force to strengthen myself." Solomon, undeterred, commanded Orneus to cease his torment and instead work on the construction of the temple. Bound by the ring's power, the demon had no choice but to obey. From that day forward, Solomon used the ring to summon other demons, compelling them to reveal their names, powers, and weaknesses. Each demon was different. Beelzebul, the prince of demons; Asmodeus, the demon of lust; Abazethebu, who had hardened Pharaoh's heart. But all were compelled to serve the king. As the demons toiled under Solomon's command, the temple rose, a magnificent structure that symbolized the divine covenant between God and his people. The people of Israel marveled at the king's power, and peace reigned in the land. Yet, as Solomon's power grew, so did his pride. He began to rely more on the ring and less on the wisdom that had made him great. Years passed, and one day, Solomon learned of a powerful demon known as Ashmedai, also known as Asmodeus, the king of demons, whose mischief and chaos were infamous. Determined to subdue Ashmedai and bring him under control, Solomon devised a cunning plan. He instructed his servants to find a chain engraved with the name of God and a flask of wine, and he set out to capture the elusive demon. Ashmedai was found near a mountain, living in seclusion. Solomon's servants poured the wine into a well, from which Ashmedai drank, knowing that the demon abstained from alcohol. But on that day, thirst overcame him, and he drank deeply. As the wine took effect, Ashmedai grew drowsy, his powers dulled by the drink. Seizing the moment, Solomon's men chained him and brought him back to Jerusalem. Solomon's initial plan was to force Ashmedai to help build the temple, using the demon's immense strength to move the heaviest stones. But Ashmedai, though bound, was cunning. He served Solomon while secretly plotting his escape. One day, he tricked Solomon into removing his ring, the source of his power over the demons. In an instant, Ashmedai seized the ring, cast Solomon out of his palace and took the throne for himself. For years, Solomon wandered the land as a beggar, stripped of his kingdom and his power. No one recognized the once great king, who had been reduced to nothing by the demon's deception. The experience left Solomon humbled and reflective on the dangers of pride and the thin line between wisdom and folly. Eventually, fate led him back to Jerusalem, where he discovered Ashmedai flaunting his stolen power. With courage and a bit of luck, Solomon managed to retrieve his ring, regain his throne, and banish Ashmedai once and for all. But the once wise king was now a changed man. The power he had wielded to control the forces of darkness had also led him to his downfall. He understood that even the greatest wisdom could be undone by pride. As Solomon resumed his reign, he carried with him the lessons learned from his encounters with the demons. That power must be tempered with humility, and that no man, no matter how wise, is beyond the reach of temptation. The tale of Solomon became a timeless reminder that true wisdom lies not just in knowledge, but in the humility to recognize one's limitations. Solomon's final days were a far cry from what was expected of a king with so much glory and splendor. The man who had once been known for his wisdom, wealth, and devotion to God had become a shadow of his former self. His later years were marked by spiritual decline, political instability, and a growing sense of disillusionment. The book of Ecclesiastes, traditionally attributed to Solomon, reflects this sense of despair. In it, Solomon reflects on the futility of worldly pursuits, declaring that everything is meaningless in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 2. This sentiment is an obvious contrast to the optimism and faith that characterized his earlier writings in Proverbs and the Song of Solomon. It suggests that, in his later years, Solomon came to realize the emptiness of the very things he had once placed so high: wealth, power, pleasure, and wisdom. The Bible does not provide a detailed account of Solomon's death, but it is clear that he left behind a divided and troubled kingdom. His son Rehoboam's harsh policies and failure to heed wise counsel led to the rebellion of the northern tribes and the eventual split of Israel into two kingdoms. The once great kingdom that Solomon had inherited and expanded was now fractured, and the seeds of its eventual downfall had been sown. Solomon's life offers several important lessons. First, it serves as a reminder that wisdom needs to be balanced with a life of righteousness. Wisdom must be accompanied by humility, obedience to God, and a commitment to living according to His will. Solomon's future decline was not due to a lack of wisdom, but to a failure to continually apply that wisdom in his own life, particularly in his relationships and spiritual practices. Second, Solomon's story shows the dangers of allowing power, wealth, and worldly pleasures to become idols in our lives. Solomon began his reign with a deep sense of dependence on God, but as his wealth and power grew, so did his sense of self-sufficiency. He began to trust in his abilities and resources rather than in God, leading him down a path of spiritual and moral compromise. Finally, Solomon's life is a testament to the importance of finishing well. He started his reign with great promise and divine favor, but he did not finish strong. His story is a sobering reminder that how we end our journey is more important as how we begin it. Solomon's wisdom and achievements in his early years were overshadowed by the spiritual and moral failures of his later years, leaving a legacy that is both celebrated and lamented. The end of Solomon was not just a personal tragedy. It had far-reaching consequences for the entire nation of Israel. His failure to remain faithful to God set in motion a series of events that would lead to the eventual decline of the United Kingdom of Israel. The seeds of idolatry that Solomon planted by allowing the worship of other gods within Israel would later grow into a full-blown spiritual crisis for the nation. As his reign progressed, the once glorious king who had been so devoted to God began to lose the spiritual fervor that had marked his early years. Solomon's wealth and power had initially been seen as blessings from God, but they eventually became the very things that led him away from the path of righteousness. His insatiable desire for more wives, more wealth, more alliances, blinded him to the dangers of compromising his faith. One of the tragic ironies of Solomon's story is that the man who wrote so eloquently about the dangers of folly in the book of Proverbs became ensnared by it himself. He had warned others about the dangers of following the wrong path, yet he failed to heed his advice. His wisdom, though immense, could not protect him from the subtle and pervasive influence of sin. This is the dark tale of King Solomon that has been hidden in history. If you enjoyed this interestingly dark tale of the wisest king recorded in history, please like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. God bless you.